Hey everyone, we'll get started in just a moment. Daniel Battsek and I will be joining in just a moment. Give it a couple minutes just to let everybody in. Welcome, welcome. Thanks for joining us. We're going to get started at about 3:02. I'm going to turn off my notification center. Great. Hey everybody, we're going to just wait one more minute while people find the link and get into the Zoom call. Thanks for your patience. We'll get started in 1 minute. This is like the minute silence at the beginning of a football match. How long does it last? Okay, we're at 3:02, so let's get started. My name is Tom Hall. I'm Executive Director here at Montclair Film. Thank you all for joining us today as our members. We're so grateful for your enduring support, especially through these difficult months of COVID. We're continuing to put on programs and looking for ways to connect audiences with ideas and conversations. So I'm really, really grateful that you're here with us and continue to support us during these times. So thank you for that. I also wanted to, before we got started, just let everyone know that we did announce yesterday our upcoming fundraising event with Stephen and Evie Colbert, which will be taking place on May 7th. If you want to grab a ticket for that, you visit montclairfilm.org, and tickets are on sale now. Your support there would be wonderful as well. We would greatly appreciate that. We haven't had a fundraiser in over 18 months about, and it's been a rough year and a half for everyone. I know there's a lot of need out there, but we'd be so grateful for the support at this time as we continue to push toward a sort of brighter future. We're all on the edge of the vaccine being a relevant part of our lives, and I'm hopeful that we can begin to recover and put on programs in person with you. So help us get there. Join us on May 7th with Stephen and Evie. I'll be moderating that conversation too. So after you enjoy my incredible moderating skills today, you'll want to be there for that one as well on May 7th. So I'm pleased to introduce you to one of Montclair Film's trustees and a founding trustee of our organization, Daniel Battsek. For those of you who don't know Daniel, he is the director of Film4 in the UK since 2016. And he has 30 years of production development and distribution experience, which we're going to get into in detail. So I'm not going to read all of his credits, but he is really one of the great minds, I think, behind contemporary production, distribution, and we're so fortunate to have him as a trustee and to have him with us here today in the wake of his football team's incredible FA Cup victory today. So Daniel, thank you so much. And apparently the birth of your grandchild today as well. So
yeah,
congratulations.
So it's a good day. And I'm drinking wine partly for those reasons and partly because I'm in London. It is 8 o'clock here. So I think that's sort of allowed, isn't it?
Absolutely. When they say it's 5 o'clock somewhere, I always imagine the UK. Because it's always 5 o'clock in the UK as well.
Yep.
So that's great. All right. Well, let's get started. And I want to, we did a sort of loose introduction, but let's talk a little bit about your career path in the film world and how you got to the point where now you're the director of Film4. So you started off, I think a lot of people think of people getting into the movie business in the old sort of Hollywood way. You're working in the mailroom and then you work your way up to the head of the studio. You're not that far from that story in a lot of ways.
Not really. I mean, yeah, I think if I'd started in the mailroom, I would never have got out. But yeah, I did have a sort of, well, first of all, I'm really, really happy to be here. Love supporting the Montclair Film Festival whenever I can, and can't wait to get back there, actually. So it's great to be doing this. So nice to feel linked via you and via the people tuning in to all things Montclair Film. Yeah, I mean, I had, I know a lot sort of people often kind of, when they ask you, how did you get into the film business, they're used to a sort of some form of traditional route in, but mine was anything but that. I mean, I tried to get into the British film business, but it was a total closed shop when I was straight out of college, and I just decided to get as far away as possible where they still spoke English of sorts. And so I went to Australia, and bust around there for a while, thinking, that I would find a way in. Didn't really manage to, but ultimately ran out of money and started working as a sort of antipasta chef in a Italian restaurant in Sydney that happened to be the restaurant where a bunch of really well-known Australian filmmakers used to come: Peter Weir, Gillian Armstrong, Jane Campion, and I would just bundle out of the kitchen at a certain time of night and engage these poor people in conversation until ultimately one of them gave me a job. And that was, so I was sort of one night working in an Italian kitchen, the next night on a movie set.
Unbelievable. And so from there, you remind me of the name of the company?
Hoyts.
Hoyts, right, exactly. You did marketing for them, right?
I sort of did everything. I mean, they were a big, they had a lot of theaters, but they'd only just started in distribution, and they bought a bunch of British films. So that was really my calling card. They were just like, do you know anything about British cinema? And I was like, yes. And they were like, great, you can have a job. So it was sort of, it was perfect. And yeah, kind of, it was the best way of learning, really. I had to do everything from marketing and publicity to working out how you got, I mean, in those days, every film that got to a cinema was two gigantic trunks of film, and they had to physically be got to the cinema. And when you're in Australia, that could mean thousands or hundreds of miles distance from one place to another, and you'd have to get it there from plane, train, donkey, mule, whatever whatever method of transport you could find. And it sort of cemented in my head something that is going to sound very sort of obvious, but if the film isn't in the projector in the cinema when the people are sitting in the audience waiting to watch it, it doesn't matter how good the movie it is, it doesn't matter how brilliantly you've marketed it and publicized it, it's endgame. So it sort of was actually a very good way of kind of getting me to focus on whatever else goes on in a very complicated and kind of crazy business. Ultimately, there's a bunch of people who've paid good money to see a movie, and if the movie ain't there, then you've spoiled that and ruined that experience, and therefore possibly lost that audience. So it was actually, in a weird sort of way, it was a really, really good grounding.
That sounds, yeah. Then how did you get back to the UK then? Because I know you went from there to sort of Palace Pictures and.
Well, I got back through a very simple way of being deported. So
yes.
So it was a sort of the reverse of what usually happens, which is convicts go from England to Australia. I went the vice versa route. I mean, basically my 6-month holiday visa was 3.5 years out of date. And I went on a mistakenly decided to go skiing in New Zealand. And when I tried to get back into Australia, they were like, okay, you've got 2 weeks to leave the country. And by that time, I kind of more or less, I thought I was living there for the rest of my life, to be honest. So left in a hurry. And when I got back to the UK, a complete, almost sort of like revolution had happened in so many different ways, in music, with punk, in fashion, with the likes of Vivienne Westwood, etc., and in the arts in general, and in film. And film suddenly, from having no independent spirit whatsoever, there were a bunch of really exciting independent film companies. Richard Branson had one, and Richard Branson's first business partner, the late Nick Powell, had Palace Pictures. And I went along to see him and when I say unorthodox, I mean his office was his couch, and that's before we were all working from our couches. You know, I just remember thinking, yeah, this is the sort of company I want to work for, where the guy who owns it is just, you know, just sitting on a couch when you go in for an interview. And yeah, got a job there, and it was kind of, I then had 8 crazy years, because Palace Pictures really was right at the kind of sharp end of independent film production and distribution. We also, you know, we kind of got sort of caught up in the whole video nasty era, because we distributed a film called Evil Dead by Sam Raimi, and Sam Raimi then was about 18, and this lady called Mary Whitehouse, who was I can't think of exactly who well, she was a bit like the character that Kate Blanchett played in Mrs. America. She was very conservative.
Phyllis Schlafly.
Yeah, exactly. Very conservative, and decided that Evil Dead, which was, you know, it's a schlock horror film. I mean, it's not to be taken in any way seriously. And in fact was the debut of, you know, someone who went on to become a huge talent directing Spider-Man and all the rest. But basically we nearly put him in jail, because they took against us big time, and it was really kind of pretty risky. But that kind of gave you an idea of the sort of company. I mean, we also, you know, we were I mean, I think we had both Nick Powell and Stephen Woolley. Steve's still around and as a producer, someone I work with a lot. We had good taste, basically. You know, we did the creme de la creme of European art house cinema and American cinema, actually. So we had wonderful films like Paris, Texas, and Diva, Kiss of the Spider Woman, Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. I mean, just some wonderful films. And it was a very exciting time.
To go from that to sort of Disney many years later, from your punk rock beginnings to your corporate, what's the word? Sellout, I guess is the wrong word, but
no, it's the right word.
Okay, great. So your corporate sellout. So let's talk about that transition, because you know you ended up being the head of international distribution, right? In Europe, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think my transitions are tend to be quite interesting movements, because yeah, I was at Palace for 8 years. I loved it for sort of 7 of them, and then for the final one, I didn't love it quite so much, because in order to get paid, I had to more or less bash down the accountant's door, because he'd bolted himself in there, because various bailiffs and who knows what else were coming to collect, you know, literally the desks and the phones. And so it got very hairy. And during that last year, at the beginning of that last year, a headhunter asked to see me, and I thought, oh, this could be fun. And they don't tell you what they're dealing with or anything, but they were saying, you know, it's a major studio, they're setting up an international distribution. And as you say, Tom, my first thought was, there's no way I'm selling out to a big American studio. That's just not, I'm not doing that. It's not me. Independent, you know, I'm sort of, you know, I'm kind of like edgy, and you know, but towards the end of that year, when I wasn't getting paid, and I had a mortgage, I was my defenses were somewhat down, shall we say. So even when I discovered that said studio was Disney, who were the most corporate of all the corporations, I just sort of was like, yeah, you know what, I'm going to do this. And actually, it turned out to be more interesting and more sort of not necessarily edgy, but more sort of less corporate than I expected, because what Disney had done had gone all around the world, because they didn't used to have their own distribution, believe it or not, given what a sort of behemoth they are now. They used to sub-license their films to Warner Brothers. So this was their first attempt to actually create an international studio. And in fact, what they did is, instead of just going and getting the head of Warner Brothers or the head of Paramount or whatever in each of the major territories and just saying, hey, come and work for us, they picked people like me. I mean, they went and picked people from different walks of life, certainly not from sort of corporations as such. And so it actually created a really interesting environment to work in. And they started to make some interesting movies. And so it was a lot better than I was expecting. I mean, I stayed there nearly 20 years, so it can't have been all bad.
You got there like right when the Renaissance was happening with Don Hahn and you know, sort of the Pixar stuff started
exactly.
ascending. That was like the moment when because they were coming off all this live action material and sort of these failed animation. The animation studio is very down, and then suddenly they have not always been as big as they are right now.
Absolutely not. I mean, they were really, you know, I mean, they weren't like on their uppers, but they were definitely struggling. They'd had some, you know, really, you know, sort of unsuccessful animated films, and then suddenly Beauty and the Beast, and then Aladdin, and then as you say, at the same time, they got into business with Pixar, so suddenly you've got Toy Story, and that kind of, I mean, if you think of the environment now for animated film, I mean, that was the beginning of that complete change in the whole perspective for animation. I mean, they became not just kids movies, they became all audience movies. And I love those Pixar movies.
But in parallel, while they were diversifying, they picked up Miramax.
Yeah, I know.
Well,
I know.
The portfolio diversified, and there, you know, suddenly you're in with really great stuff coming out of that studio as well. There's Pulp Fiction, and you know, a lot of like the great sort of '90s indie renaissance in America was coming through Miramax Studios, which, you know, you were also handling that material overseas. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, well, I was sort of specifically handling it in the UK because because at Palace, it's sort of weird how these parallels happen. At Palace, we were kind of like the UK sort of equivalent of Miramax, without, I hasten to add, the added sort of unpleasantness, to say the least, of the Weinsteins. But in terms of the movies that we did, you know, we produced The Crying Game at Palace. That was one of the first films that really broke out for Miramax. We bought Cinema Paradiso together when I was at Palace. So there was already that sort of connection. And then, as you say, Jeffrey Katzenberg was running Disney at the time. He bought Miramax and then promptly left Disney. And basically, right. I mean, it's sort of so weird when you know, I mean, they bought them for hundreds of millions of dollars, and then we're like, we have no idea what to do with this. We can't speak to the Weinsteins. We don't like the way they do business. We don't understand their films. Is there anybody in the entire Walt Disney Company who has any connection and who can deal with these guys? And someone said, well, yeah, I think Daniel Battsek does. And boom, suddenly there I was, you know, sort of front and center. And yeah, I mean, they're appalling people, but you know, you can't argue with the fact that they had amazing sort of taste in films and incredible sort of you know, kind of enthusiasm and courage in terms of the way in which those films were kind of made and then brought to the market.
They definitely changed the story of, you know, movies and award season, which we're going to get to here as part of our conversation today. I mean, they radically overhauled everyone's perception. Totally. And it's tied to the film festival landscape as well. That they were huge. And it's funny, you know, you ended up taking over Miramax after they were bought out and left the company or whatever, as president. And everyone, you know, you look back on the Harvey Weinstein years and everyone knew what was going on with Harvey Weinstein, essentially. I don't know that we knew every detail and every person, but everyone knew he was a bully. Everyone knew that he was a very difficult person. Everyone knew that there was a tinge of, you know, sexual harassment going on with him at the least. So when he got out of there, you've got a company on your hands and you've got to mop all that stuff up and keep the company going. And you ended up having home runs. I mean, you guys ended up continuing the streak. I mean, it made it seem less like, I know they went into the Weinstein Company and did their own thing, but Miramax did very well for itself after they left when you took over.
I mean, I mean, I have to say, in those days, the sort of first involvement that one had with the Weinsteins, you just saw them as being larger than life and kind of very aggressive, and that's kind of, but there's so many people like that. It's only later that we discovered just how ugly the truth really was. I mean, it was kind of an extraordinary moment for me. Again, talking of these sort of transitions, I mean, I was happily, kind of by that time married with kids, living in London, not expecting anything unusual to happen. I went to the US on a business trip for Disney, and halfway through the trip I was called in to meet with it was Michael Eisner and Bob Iger, because they were just in the middle of Eisner moving out and Bob Iger moving in. And my first thought was, this is not good. Why have I been plucked from this trip where I believe I was behaving myself, and suddenly I'm just seeing like the two people who run the entire company, and they just were straight out. They just were like, listen, we want you to run Miramax in New York. And I was totally sort of, but kind of baffled, because by then the rumors had already circulated about all sorts of other candidates that were more likely, like someone who was actually living in America and American, and who had had experience producing and distributing films in America, those sort of people. So I was sort of like, I mean, it was the most incredible opportunity, but also the scariest opportunity. I mean, scary in itself, and also the thought of working in New York with the name Miramax above the door, remembering that Miramax is actually Mirror and Max, which is named after the Weinstein brothers' parents. The thought of wandering around Manhattan and not expecting at any moment to be pushed under a subway train or in front of a truck. So it was
real, though.
Yeah. So it was a really, it was scary, but good scary. I mean, it was just an incredibly exciting opportunity. And I was really pleased. I mean, I was really pleased that Disney were determined for Miramax to remain sort of independent, albeit part of the Walt Disney Company, and also in New York, because it could so easily have been just taken onto the studio lot, and I think would have been a very different kind of animal if it had done that. Instead, I was just told, I mean, it was literally just me and like an office and a kettle and an assistant, and was just told, like, rebuild the company however you want. Yeah, it was amazing.
That is amazing. Is this now, when in this window did you arrive in Montclair?
Then, so
Yes, exactly.
During the time after the Eisner Iger summit, while I was sort of like king in waiting type of thing, because of various legal things, of course, that were going on with the Weinsteins, no one was allowed to know that their successor basically had been chosen. So I and my wife Lucy made these kind of clandestine trips to New York from London in the middle of winter. I mean, it was horrific, trying desperately to find somewhere to live fast. 3 kids that needed to get into school fast, because I think this was like February or March, so we were sort of trying to get in, and went everywhere, because I mean, I'd been to New York many times, but of course I only really knew kind of the Midtown. Sort of Manhattan Island basically, and not even all of that. So when it comes, and London is I mean, obviously London is a huge city and everything, but it's sort of much easier city to kind of, you can live in North London and work in South London or West and East, whatever. Whereas New York is a whole different scenario with the infamous bridges and tunnels and all the rest of it. So I was like up in Greenwich, I was in Brooklyn, I was all over the place, couldn't find anywhere that I really liked and or could get all 3 kids into school. And then a friend of my sister's said, oh, you should come out to this place Montclair, which I have to admit I had never heard of. Of course, can't imagine such a thing now, but Montclair was a sleepy old place in those days. And and honestly, it was love at first sight. I mean, it just really kind of immediately kind of connected with it, met some great people there, and got the kids into school. And also it just sort of felt as near, I mean, I live in Southwest London, you know, when I'm in London, and which is about, you know, 12 miles from the city centre. I mean, it had many sort of comparisons, had its own cinema. You know, that's what I loved about Montclair. Obviously, unfortunately, not quite the case right now, but it had great theatres, I mean, cinemas, and you know, in a really sort of artistic and diverse community. All the things that I was looking for, suddenly they were all in one place, and that place was Montclair.
So while you're in America, you did after leaving Miramax, you did a stint at Nat Geo where you produced Restrepo, which I recommend everyone watch. A wonderful, powerful documentary about the Afghan conflict, and was an Academy Award nominee. Did it win? Did it win Oscar?
It did not, sadly.
Yeah,
no.
it was nominated. And then you went to Cohen Media, which I remember well, and ran that institution, which is owned by Charles Cohen, who is for those who don't know, a billionaire cinephile who dabbles in film exhibition and distribution as part of his empire. So yeah, I mean, we could probably talk about that, but I want to get to you sort of headed back, you know, after Cohen Media, you were sort of called again, I think, back to the UK. Do you want to talk a little bit about sort of the decision to move back to Film4 and that position you're in now?
Well, again, it's sort of, I mean, yeah, I when Miramax, so after 5 or 6 years at Miramax, where, you know, we had a lot of success. I mean, not everything was successful, but we had, you know, we had some wonderful films that we made, like The Queen. And, you know, I remember actually very early on in my time at Miramax, you used to get, in those days, you would get actual scripts for reading, you know, the infamous weekend read, where you would be delivered scripts on a Friday, have to read them over the weekend and make a decision as to whether you were going to greenlight them or pass on them by Monday. And I remember one weekend I got No Country for Old Men, the Coen Brothers movie, and There Will Be Blood, Paul Thomas Anderson movies, both those scripts on the same weekend. And not only did I have to decide whether to greenlight one or the other, I had to greenlight both of them or neither of them. Now, of course, now anybody would say, well, of course, I mean, it was so obvious. Why wouldn't you do it? But it was, yeah, it was a kind of very fateful, because that kind of established Miramax under my leadership. Those two movies, you know, which we shared with Paramount, but nevertheless, kind of, you know, No Country went on to win Best Film and 4 other Oscars, I think, and There Will Be Blood won Best Actor for Daniel Day-Lewis. So, you know, it's kind of, yeah, it's pretty extraordinary. Then eventually Miramax was sold again, and I moved on, as you say, to Nat Geo, and then on to Cohen Media. So I got some, you know, sort of interesting experiences, certainly working for Charles, who is, you know, who is the archetypal, you know, billionaire who also loves movies. You know, we had some very interesting times. As you know, now he owns the Landmark chain, and he's a, you know, he's a big force in exhibition, distribution, maybe not so much. But I was sort of, I'd gone through the kind of 3 stages of working for someone like that. First stage, he loved me, thought I was great, I could have total freedom, lots of money to spend, wonderful movies to buy. Second stage, doesn't love me quite so much, starts to like want to make decisions that overrule my decisions. Third stage, we're not talking to each other. And during that third stage, I was approached by a friend of mine who was actually running Film4 at the time, who had only recently taken over, but had already got a better offer in his mind anyway. And he was told that he couldn't leave unless he found a successor, and that successor had to be me. So basically he came, found me, and it was sort of it was both a very easy and a very hard decision. I mean, Film4 goes right back to my roots, you know, going back, as we were talking about earlier, about Palace Pictures. I mean, so many of the films that we did in the early days at Palace, My Beautiful Laundrette, Stephen Frears' early films, Mike Lee's early films, Ken Loach, some of those great British filmmakers were all Film4. Film4 was supporting all of them, and we at Palace were distributing those films. So it kind of felt right back in what I knew, and right back to my sort of roots. At the same time, I mean, I was living in Montclair. I wasn't about to leave. My kids had all grown up and were, sort of starting families and stuff. It was a very, very tough personal decision, but a very easy professional decision.
Yeah. So let's talk through sort of, as we make our way towards the Academy Awards now, and I want to lay out for our viewers sort of the path that a project takes to get from, let's say, a script that's being sent to you by an agent or by a development executive at your company through to the award ceremony itself, and sort of the life cycle of that work, just so that people can understand sort of how rare and precious it is to get to this awards season and have a fighting chance to win Best Picture out of all the work that's coming over your desk over the course of the year. So let's start it sort of at the beginning. What are the criteria for new projects that you at Film4 want to work on? You had a couple of films this year that are very, very different from one another. One is Rocks, which is did it go to Netflix here in the States? I think it's coming. Yeah. So it's Netflix here. Everyone should check it out if and when they can. And then The Father, which is also having a sort of run toward the Oscars this year. Both of those are sort of recent projects that did very well at the BAFTA Awards with nominations as well, both of these films, but they're very, very different. So what is the criteria when you say, these are the types of projects that a Film4 is going to work on when those projects arrive on your desk?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, they couldn't be more different, and yet they share some DNA that we look for. I mean, Rocks is an example of a film that was that we aspire to, which is to develop a film from the ground up. I mean, normally we would start with a script. With that film, we actually didn't even start with that. The writers and the director, Sarah Gavron, came to see us, and they said, we want to go in to a South London girls' school, and we want to talk to the kids, and we want to create a film from those discussions and workshop it, and then actually hire some of the girls themselves as well as professional actors to tell that story. So that was a real kind of just building a film brick by brick. And when you do that, I mean, we at Film4, we have what's known as development money. So we're able to give the writers, the producer, whoever else they need, the necessary kind of seed money, if you like, to sort of spend some time to work towards creating a script. Then you have to build the rest of the finance plan for the film, which will involve getting an international sales company to put some money up in order for them to have the rights to sell to other distribution companies around the world. You might get some what's known as equity financiers, so people who are just prepared to put money in the hope of getting money out once the film becomes successful. And then we're a sort of Film4 is fairly special in that we not only develop these projects from the ground up, but we follow them all the way through. So we are at the table with our filmmakers as the film goes to festivals or goes to markets or whatever, and we can guide them. And I guess because I'm there, I've had that experience of international film festivals, international distribution, US distribution, and a lot of filmmakers need that sort of support because they just don't know. I mean, you can't learn everything from just reading trade magazines or whatever, or sort of Googling it on the internet. It just doesn't work. So it's very specific and very particular. So that was that's that version. And then I guess The Father, I mean, The Father shares some comparisons in that the writer-director Florian Zeller is in fact a first-time filmmaker. I mean, he's a very established theater director, but this was his debut feature, and we are very keen to support debut features. But of course, that film had when we came on board, the first draft of the script had been written, which was an adaptation of Florian's play that had been sort of written and adapted and translated by Christopher Hampton. It had Anthony Hopkins cast, it had Olivia Colman cast. So we were part of sort of bringing our expertise into that sort of mix, and then we're, as I said, we were very involved in finding the right distributor for it in the US, which was Sony Classics, and then watching it, as it premiered originally at Sundance Film Festival, I guess over a year ago now, and sort of then being part of the journey that it went on through festivals and awards and to where we are today.
So you sort of glanced over it very quickly, but sometimes whenever I talk to people about festivals and markets and things of that nature, I don't think people realize how much opportunity there is out there potentially for a film in terms of getting international reach. We tend to think of things like the Avengers. Disney owns the Avengers. They're going to take it out to 10 million theaters around the world. They're going to make $1 billion on it. They'll have local distribution partners that help them based on wherever they are or whatever. But there's not a patchwork, really. There's a small patchwork approach, I guess, for the Avengers. But for a film like The Father, you're going country by country, partner by partner, and putting those deals together to recoup investment for all these different investors that you mentioned, whether it be equity financing, you guys putting money in, other people putting money in. The distributors who then buy it are going to want to take their cut as well of the money. So how do you guys decide on is it money talks around the world, or do you have preferred partnerships? How do you establish these relationships and get these films seen on a global basis? Because I think that's sort of the magic of the distribution and production linkage.
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely is, and there are multiple ways to skin that particular cat. I mean, there are so many different sort of finance plans that are put together for films. But as you say, in the independent sector, it's never a one-stop shop. It's always, a mixture of, sort of potential and reality. And a lot of, many films are built on potential, and they have to achieve that potential if anybody's ever going to get paid. But you mentioned as well the sort of the way in which those sort of independent films are kind of launched into the world on the back of the sort of festival calendar. And the festival calendar for independent film kind of basically starts with the Sundance Film Festival in January, moves to Berlin in February. I mean, this is in a normal year. In the pandemic, they've been all over the place, these festivals, and of course, no one's been attending any of them. But
and Daniel, that's just to say these are films without distribution. These are films that you are, because distributors would say Toronto, Telluride, Venice, for the award season launch would be their kickoff of the year. So it's funny that you say that, because we often get questioned as festival programmers, well, why didn't you show Gravity? I'm like, well, Gravity, it came out in October. We were in May at the time, so we can't get our hands on, certain things. The calendar's a little bit all over the place. But you have produced a film, just to clear for the audience, that, let's say, The Father, that has not sold in the US yet, and you're now taking it to market via Sundance as the appropriate platform and you've made a choice. You could have gone to whoever would have taken you.
Well, it's sort of partly our choice, and because those festivals, even though they are also markets, are very curated, like your own festival. So you can't just sort of say, hey, Sundance, here's The Father, where's our slot? I mean, it has to be selected. But yes, you have a strategy, like what is the best festival? And The Father and Sundance, for those that know Sundance, you might think that's maybe not the ideal festival, but you just have to kind of judge, what are the sort of frame of mind of the buyers going to be in, who needs an Academy film? Because Sundance is a great festival because it's early in the year to buy a film that you're then going to mount an Academy campaign on, because you've got several months. It's in January, Academy campaigns don't really start until the fall, so you've got a lot of time to sort of build momentum. So that's why we decided on Sundance for The Father. But there are other festivals and other markets that you select for for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's for an awards play, sometimes because you just sort of you just sort of feel that you can create the right kind of feeding frenzy, I guess. And that's still very much part of the business, is launching films that nobody has seen into these markets and then watching what happens, really. And sometimes not a lot happens, and sometimes you get 4 or 5 Neon and A24 and Sony and an IFC all bidding for the film at the same time. Obviously that's an ideal situation, and then the price goes up and everybody gets their money back straight off the bat.
And that's one country.
Yeah,
and then
absolutely.
you've got Australia, then you've got other markets all over the world where you're doing the same thing. And so you've got all these different, and the economics of those markets are very different depending, but that I just think it's so fascinating to strategize. And places like Sundance, like people have always said, it's funny because when you talk to people outside of the sort of festival team or the board in Montclair, they're like, oh, we're the new Sundance, we're going to be the new, and I'm like, we're never going to be the new Sundance. If you want, because what you don't want to do is leave town so that someone from LA can fly in, or from London can fly and rent your house while you leave, and then come buy movies and then leave town again, or when you come back in. It's just a very different environment for what you want in terms of a community festival or whatever. So I always think about that as well. So let's talk about Cannes for a second, because I'm always fascinated by Cannes prestige, but it's almost irrelevant to the US award season market in a lot of ways, because it's so international. It does have some sort of play, and I have a good example, and I have a example that of course completely counters what I just said.
Yeah.
Yeah, debunks it, exactly. But I'm thinking of a film like You Were Never Really Here, which is one of your films. By the way, anyone who's fascinated by the Jeffrey Epstein case, this is a prescient movie in a lot of ways, from Lynn Ramsey, that Daniel produced and ended up with Amazon. Is that right? Yeah, so it's on Amazon Prime, but I highly recommend it. But this is a film that went to Cannes, and I'm right in that? Yeah, it went to Cannes, because I never get to go, but it went to Cannes, and I had a lot of people talking, and I think it was sort of because of the timing and not having as much time, and Amazon picking it up and not sure what to do with it theatrically with streaming services, is my point. This sort of calculus has changed a little bit.
It has.
Talk about that?
Cannes is still, the preeminent kind of, French pun intended, creme de la creme of film festivals. It's still the sort of blue ribbon badge of honor, internationally, and in fact in the US. I mean, it may not. I assume you were going to mention Parasite, because that was a film that that did in fact launch at Cannes and won the Palme d'Or, the biggest prize at Cannes, and then went on to win Best Picture. But as you say, that's a sort of unusual thing these days. But even still, to have if you get chosen in competition at Cannes, you're able to put these little palm leaves on your poster, on your ad, wherever you see the film, and it is the most recognizable stamp of quality, basically, in the business. And for any film that aspires to play to that, sort of audience that is selective about the films that they see, then that's something that you'd always like for your movie.
Yeah, and so talk about a little bit about taking You Were Never Really Here to Cannes and making a decision to go with a streaming service for that movie, and sort of how you guys negotiate that, because I do think the landscape has shifted. So we've been talking traditional, the Miramax route, and then the Sundance for The Father going to Sony Classics, who are very traditional in their theatrical exhibition process, but Amazon is not.
No, I mean, listen, that was sort of a while ago now, and now it seems, and it seemed unusual at the time, and it was unusual at the time. Now it's almost more likely that a film will be sold to a streamer than it will be sold to a traditional distributor. And even if you sell it to a traditional distributor, they probably are in cahoots with a streamer of some sort, and so the actual way in which that film is going to come into people's recognition is likely to be a mix of theatrical cinema release and then some sort of streaming release. So I mean it was changing fairly quickly and fairly dramatically before the pandemic, and it has just gone accelerated at 1,000 miles an hour as a result of the pandemic, because so many films were held up because theaters were closed, and therefore in order to return something on investment, or in fact to return a lot on investment, they were sold to the streamers, who by that time had sort of almost run out of content because they'd been plowing it out and everybody had been at home. So the sort of the famous "I finished Netflix" saying actually was almost true. And so all those streamers, Apple, Hulu, Disney Plus, Disney Star, Netflix, Amazon, all buying all sorts of films. And yeah, it's a whole new world. You know, not entirely sure how it's all going to shake out, not entirely sure. You know, I'm very confident that cinemas will come back and that people will go back to cinemas, but the sort of the traditional kind of release in cinemas and then 4 months later, you know, some form of home entertainment, that's never gonna be sustained again. So it's a totally different kind of movie map, if you like, going forward. And something like you never really hear. I mean, Amazon at that point were just the most aggressive buyer on the lot, really, and that's why we sold it to them. And they, at the time, if you remember, they did have a model where they were distributing, you know, giving a full window for distribution, and then available on Amazon. So and they were run by, you know, really great distributor in Bob Burney. So it was sort of like, it wasn't a hard decision, actually. It didn't feel like we were doing something that was the antithesis of the norm in terms of film distribution. It actually felt very appropriate.
So let's talk about campaigning now. To get you've premiered at a festival, you've got a buyer, perhaps, you know, and when you were at Miramax, you were the buyer. Maybe at Film4 in the US, you're the seller, and you're trying to get these films across the line as well and get more revenue to those distributors so that you can make more money on the film as well. So we saw, you mentioned Parasite, which was, yes, my last year proved everybody wrong about Cannes in the United States, but Neon did an incredible job. Tom Quinn, who is the head of Neon, did an incredible job with Parasite last year. You couldn't turn the corner this year because of everything being digital and virtual. It was we opened with Nomadland, which is a good example, another Sony Classics title, which may or may not be competing with The Father in terms of their attention and their interest, and we can talk
actually
about
that was my mistake. It's of course it's Searchlight Nomadland.
Oh, Searchlight.
I think I wrote it wrong.
You're right.
It
is Searchlight. That's right.
Little
It is Searchlight.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yes. So you have Nomadland now. Searchlight's done a very good job of that. And again, like I said, it opened Montclair Film Festival this year. You did a lot of that at Miramax here in the US. So can you talk about building a campaign? You've got your festival premiere, you're going out from there. You've either bought it at Miramax or you produced it all the way through and now you're using it as a launching pad. Can you talk a little bit about building that campaign? Because Miramax is obviously famous for being change agents on Oscar campaign.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of weird. It's almost hard to remember that sort of campaign, because this campaign this year has been so vastly different because there's been no kind of in-person events. But yeah, I mean, the campaign, you know, sort of goes from everything from, as you say, a sort of fairly obvious launching at a festival, you know, winning awards. You know, if you winning the audience award at Toronto, I remember, you know, when we did 3 billboards outside Ebbing, Missouri a couple of years ago, that was the kind of the sort of the lighting of the torch, if you like, for that Academy campaign, was winning the audience award at Toronto. If you get selected for the Telluride Film Festival, that's another kind of starting gun for an Academy campaign, or maybe even, you know, maybe it's not the starting gun, but it's a kind of raising of the flag that this film is going to be a contender. And then, you know, I mean, the campaigns are multi-million-dollar efforts, mixture of sort of haranguing Academy members with information, Q&As, advertising, sort of free gifts, but done in such a way they don't appear to be free gifts, so they don't apparently, so they don't break any rules. Like I've heard of, sort of people sending out, I mean, now in the old days you would send out screeners, and you would send them, and then you might send a really nice sort of speaker to attach to your screen, which isn't a gift. It's just like, in order for you to really enjoy this film, we felt you ought to have this fantastic Bose kind of speaker system to attach to your so it's definitely not a free gift. It's got nothing to do with the Academy campaign. It's just so that you can really enjoy this film. So there's a lot of that. I mean, and again, I say in the old days, but I'm just talking about like last year or the year before or whatever. Huge number of screenings and events and celebrity endorsements. So sort of getting a filmmaker not involved in the campaign, because obviously they're never going to support someone else's film if they've got their own horse in the race, inviting you to a screening where they will then interview the filmmaker or filmmakers, and sort of that kind of celebrity mishmash is a very good way of persuading Academy voters that that a film is deserving of their attention. A lot of it, to be perfectly honest, is getting Academy members to see the films. There are so many movies, they have so much choice, and you want them to see your film. And if your film is great, then you know that if you can just get them to see it, because sometimes it's not going to have the biggest advertising budget or behind it. You need to find different ways of kind of creating profile and creating attention for it. Otherwise, it could get missed.
Before we go on, I just want to let all of our viewers know, if you have questions for Daniel here for the end, we have a few more questions I'm going to go over with him. But if you use the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom chat, there's a button that says Q&A. I'll be taking your questions at the end. So just feel free to hit that Q&A button, pop a couple of questions in there if you have any, and I will refer them to Daniel here at the end of the conversation. So you mentioned the multi-million-dollar campaigns that people, what's the return on investment? I mean, so let's say you put all that money in.
Sorry, what's that?
Yeah, exactly. Is it ego and prestige, or is I mean, I
know
that award,
no, it is. I mean,
wins,
yes,
you assume award wins turn into money.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean,
nominations.
Yeah, it's all of the above. I mean, there is a lot of ego involved. There's a lot of kind of, needing to massage the egos of film talent who, I'm not saying they haven't done good work, but sometimes that it doesn't really stand a chance in the sort of the Academy race, but you cannot possibly admit to that. So you still find yourself producing DVDs, doing screenings, and kind of only to really be able to say, look, we did everything that we could, but the Academy just didn't select your movie. But yeah, wins equal money. I mean, winning Best Picture, I think, can add 20, 30, 40 million dollars to the box office if you've planned your release right, so that there's still sort of gas in the tank. If you release the film 6 months prior and have already played it out, not so much. But if you win, if you win one of the key like 5 top awards, whatever, picture, actor, actress, director, any mix of those, and it's going to make a big difference. I mean, that's why they do it. I mean, of course they do it for prestige, and everybody's blinded by the prestige of awards. I mean, Netflix, you think like they could care less about awards. Why would they? They are so unbelievably successful. But oh my goodness, I mean, they put more effort into more movies every year in their sort of desperate search for a Best Picture win, which they will be continuing again this year, and so move on to try again next year. But so it's all of what you say, Tom. But the fact is there really is a bottom line, and the bottom line is to to add revenue and add profile, because of course it's not only about like, oh well, more people will come out and see it in the theaters if it wins X, Y, or Z award. It raises the profile worldwide, and you can then exploit that in home entertainment, in TV, in cable, in, you know, every form of the way in which that film is going to be monetized. It will have more value if it's been in the awards conversation, and especially if it's won.
Yeah, and so I always wonder how much of that is manufacturing perception. Is it all, like we talked about in the prep for this, you know, critical reviews making a difference in terms of key critic. Like I'm a fan of Manohla Dargis. She's a person I know personally whose taste is a almost perfect circle Venn diagram with my own taste I found over time. And so I trust her. Like she's a critic that I turn to. But the internet
I fear her.
Full of, she's a lovely person. I really love.
I fear her pen. I mean, yeah, I really, I mean, we've had our moments, Manohla and I, on certain movies, which in a way I feel like has helped a certain amount of bonding between us, but I do definitely fear her.
She's a smart cookie. I really like her. We sit together at festival screenings a lot and just chit chat. But my point there is that not every critic is the same, and now we have the internet, which is just swamped with, you know, people giving their opinion, Twitter, Instagram, all of this stuff now. Everything. And now we have the Academy is a lot of campaigns are pivoting to Zoom meetings like this one to talk up to talent about, you know, their Q&A time that they would have had in a cocktail party in LA. Now it's much more global. They can reach everybody with these invitations. I see people buying emails from festivals to promote the For Your Consideration campaigns instead of print media, which seems to be sort of falling, you know, by the wayside or whatever. So how much of that perception, how much of that pressure into the perception machine do you feel? I mean, for me, it's always the movie speaks for itself, right? If I'm not an Academy member. If I were an Academy member, I'm voting for the film I think is the best picture, regardless of how many cocktail parties and both speakers and emails I get about it. Do you know what I mean? Like it's you feel there's some integrity to that process.
Yes. Oh, you're so funny, Tom. Integrity, yeah. Listen, it's you know, the best usually does win out, to be honest. I mean, not always, but very often it does. But it's almost always gone through the grinder to get there. All of those elements play a part. Critics' reviews do, you know, sort of whatever you call it, not anti-campaigning, but well, yes, anti-campaigning, you know, sort of dirty tricks, you know, kind of rumors and all sorts of things come out during, I mean, the campaign is so long. I mean, it starts in, as we've said, it sort of potentially starts at Cannes, but let's just say, even if it doesn't start there, it certainly starts Toronto and Telluride, you know, which is Labor Day. So, and the Academy Awards are in March, or in fact this year, April. That's a long time
8 months.
For, you know, for the sort of up and down roller coaster of Academy campaigns. So all sorts of things. I mean, certainly, you know, the sort of approval of a film festival, a great review in the New York Times and one or two others have always been very significant. I like to think they will remain significant, but things like all the other forms of critical comment, either kind of professional or amateur, the sort of combination of those that now is just your Rotten Tomatoes score, which, you know, some people just use, that's just it. They don't want to read, they don't want to really know about anything like, what did it get? Is it fresh or is it not fresh? And, you know, which I worry about. I don't like that at all, because that isn't really critical opinion. I mean, it is, but it's a cumulative approach. It hasn't really given you an insight into what a film really means. But it's changing a lot. I mean, I still do think there are certain critics, and Manohla is certainly one of them, and the New York Times is certainly one of them, that for certain films remain very meaningful.
Yeah, I just, it's interesting to see. I just know somebody like, I have a blog. Do I get a press pass? And it's like, everyone has a blog. Like we all have opinions about films and blogs and stuff these days. It's just sort of crazy. So I did stick a pin in this. This is my penultimate question about campaigning. You mentioned early on getting There Will Be Blood and No Country for Old Men the same weekend to read. You ended up producing those movies, obviously, and they went on to be enormously successful, but they had different paths to the award season out of that process. And you watch those two films, and it's obvious to, I think, almost everyone which one is the more accessible movie, which would be No Country for Old Men, and therefore I think its success was probably predicated, despite it being dark, on that more accessibility. How do you navigate that? You're sitting down with Joel and Ethan Cohen on your left hand, and Paul Thomas Anderson on your right hand, and Paul Thomas Anderson is like, I've made a masterpiece, which is not wrong. And Joel and Ethan Cohen are like, we've made a masterpiece, which is also not wrong. Talk about a little bit about bringing those two to the award season.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, it's both kind of a dream come true and a total nightmare, because there's always a winner and there's always a loser. And in the case of those two films, which you shouldn't be comparing anyway, but No Country, and we, it's not just the BAFTAs and the Oscars, but it's the Golden Globes and the Critics' Choice and SAG and sort
PGA,
of
PGA,
yeah, exactly. All basically at any point when they were head to head, No Country always won. So to begin with, it was fine. You would just say, oh, bad luck, Paul. There's always next time. But that kind of that sounds a bit hollow after about the 8th time. I do remember actually, I mean, sort of filmmakers like the Coen brothers and Paul Thomas Anderson, and there are many others like them. I mean, they do not love this part of the process, this part of the business. They are not, I mean, of course they love their films to receive these accolades and stuff, but they do not like sitting through these interminable awards shows, which are mostly interminable, even if they are going to win at the end. So I do remember actually that both sets of filmmakers decided at a certain point that they were not going to go to an award show, win, lose, or draw. And I was sent, I think it was the Critics' Choice Awards, and I was literally there to collect any awards that they won. And both films won awards at that show. And I just remember really well getting up to accept the award for Best Picture for No Country for Old Men, looking out at the front row of like George Clooney, Angelina Jolie, who all had a look on their face of, who the hell is this? So both a great moment and a very, very sort of shaming moment. But they don't love it. They don't love it. And it's a long, as we've discussed, I mean, it's like a long, long process. And they thought that making the film was the process, that was the long process. And once the film was released, that was kind of like end game for them. But nowadays it absolutely is not end game. And funnily enough, this year, in a way, filmmakers have been that much more available and accepting of the campaign, because they don't need to leave their front room or even, kind of get out of their pajamas to participate in the awards campaign. And you've seen almost everyone has been involved this year, because it's basically not involved getting on a plane, getting dressed up, eating horrible food, and listening to lousy jokes read off an auto cue.
Exactly. Now it's weird that they turn them into shows. I just just send out a press release and give everybody a trophy. Although it's showbiz, so we have to do it. Okay, so we have some questions. The first one is a question about prognosticating this year's Oscars. So I'm going to call on your brilliance, and if you could contextualize some of your thoughts here in terms of how you think you know what you know, because I think people don't realize it's not your picks for the Oscars of 2021 are probably not going to be based on your favorite movie. It's based on the results of this year's campaigning and Guild Awards and this whole process. We've got, the Oscars is the finish line for this process. So you've been watching and seeing what's going on. So let's talk about some categories that you think are sort of done and dusted, that people can, when they're filling out their Oscar pool. By the way, there's a Montclair Film Oscar pool for our members. You can find it online. Go fill it out. We're giving away prizes for people.
Yeah, and I can
definitely
be hired for special guidance on that and
nice.
A share of the winnings.
Yes, and apparently you're affordable, which is great. Okay, so let's start with let's go backwards. Supporting actor.
Yeah, this one, the only sort of question I think in this is whether the fact that Daniel Kaluuya and Lakeith Stanfield, who are both in this category as supporting actors, thus asking the question, who's the lead actor in this film? Apparently nobody. So the only question is whether they will split the vote and end up allowing Sacha Baron Cohen, who I think is great and I love, but who could not master a Boston accent any better than I could in his role in the Trial of Chicago 7, kind of sneaks in on the rails to win it. But I really think Daniel Kaluuya is going to win this. I mean, he won the BAFTA. He's amazing in the movie. And as I say, the only thing that might stop that happening is if there's a split vote between him and Lakeith.
Okay, let's do best actor. Let's just say you have a conflict of interest on this one. I'd like to hear what you say anyway.
It's difficult. It's difficult, this one, because, sadly, Chadwick Boseman, who's nominated for Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, passed away at a very young age this year. An actor of, huge talent, great potential, and in fact gives a very, very good performance in Ma Rainey. I don't know if it's a very strong category this year, because you've got Riz Ahmed for Sound of Metal, who's brilliant. You've got Anthony Hopkins for The Father, who I obviously think is brilliant. You've got Stephen Yeun, who I love, for Minari. And then there's Gary Oldman in Mank. So I honestly think that this should go to Anthony Hopkins, who won the BAFTA. I think it's a quite extraordinary, really extraordinary performance for someone who has given a few extraordinary performances in his life, to be able to pull off this incredible role of a man, sort of struggling to come to terms with the fact that he is descending into dementia and trying to sort of navigate a world around him, is just so moving and so brilliant. So I do think he should win, but he won't. For the aforementioned reasons, Chadwick Boseman will win.
You think you got Chadwick Boseman? Interesting. Okay.
Why? Who do you think is going to win?
Who do I think is going to win? I don't. I think Chadwick Boseman. This is not his best performance. The thing about this one for me is it's just, he's great and I think he's excellent. But I'm very sorry that he has passed away. He's a hero, but this is not his best performance or the best role.
No, I agree.
But that whole sentence,
we're going to be outvoted.
This is the campaign, yes.
Yeah.
So that's a win for Netflix, right? Is it Ma Rainey on Netflix? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I think it is.
There we go.
Yeah.
They've put a lot into that campaign for sure. Best director.
I'm pretty sure Chloe Zhao will win this. Deservedly so. I love Nomadland. She's won everything. It would be a real turn up if she did. And if you win the DGA, the Directors Guild, which is directors voting for their own craft, if you like. I can't see anybody else bumping her off that perch.
Actress.
That's the one of the few races that is still sort of, it could almost go to, Viola Davis won SAG, right? The Screen Actors Guild. So that suddenly put a bit of a question mark over what was considered to be almost certainly either Carey Mulligan or who else is in that?
Frances McDormand.
Yeah, or Frances McDormand, exactly. It was sort of considered to be a two-horse race between the two of them. Although I also think, I think Vanessa Kirby is amazing.
Excellent. And Andra Day is great.
And she won the Golden Globe. So I mean, it's kind of, this is the most open race. I don't know. I think Carey Mulligan's going to win it. Which is slightly flying the British flag.
It is.
But also I think she's just amazing. I mean, she's such a wonderful, sort of cheeky, but also very moving and very kind of fun performance, albeit in a movie that's kind of all over the place, but it's also quite an important film, I think.
Actress in a supporting role? Do you think Maria Bakalova is going to do it for Borat?
No, I don't.
Yeah,
much as I loved her performance and her role in deciding the recent presidential election, there's the sort of there's the repeat of the Olivia Colman Glenn Close battle that I was very pleased Olivia Colman beat out for Best Actress for The Favourite. Glenn Close in The Wife that year, she was the hot favourite, and Olivia Colman won that. But I don't think either of those are going to win, because I think, and I cannot pronounce her name, but
Yoo Jung-yoon.
Thank you.
From
Minari. He plays the grandmother in Minari, and it's a gorgeous performance. She's also, and again, weirdly, this can play into it. She's won a couple of other awards, including BAFTA, and she does very good acceptance speeches.
Yes.
And believe it or not, that can be the deciding factor.
Absolutely. They're glad to be here. Great. I mean, that's definitely a big part. Are you prepared? This matters to you? That helps. It does. All right, let's do Best Picture.
Again, I mean, all the Vegas odds are telling us that it has to be Nomadland. I mean, again, it's won all the key battles that it's had to fight so far, including the most recent one, which was the BAFTA award. It's a wonderful, wonderful film. It's a very timely film. I mean, there are definitely other, there's whatever, 6, how many nominees are there? 8.
Yeah, 8.
I can't quite see anybody getting enough weight behind it. I mean, Chicago 7 has a lot of support, but didn't get a director nomination, and that's usually, although there have been cases where Best Pictures have won without a Best Director nomination, but it's a rarity. I think Promising Young Woman has a shot at this as well, again, because of its timeliness, I guess, and again, another female director. And I think the Academy have finally woken up to the need to be somewhat more diverse in their handing out of awards. So I think it's between those two, probably.
Okay, last one, sound editing. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, which I was
my special subject.
Exactly. Okay, well, we ran through all the major ones, so that's good. I agree. I think it's going to end up being. I mean, I'm hopeful it's Nomadland. Like I said, we opened the festival with it. When we moved to October, we knew that we would be in range for a different set of films. Nomadland and Minari both played the festival. Unfortunately, the father didn't, despite being invited, but not every film is for every festival. And I've got a friend.
But I mean, I think that's great.
Chicago 7. Yeah,
it's great, because I mean, of course, when you're showing them, they're still very
in October.
Yeah, they don't really have anything of the profile and the support that they have now. And I think it's great to be able to have access to them. And of course, distributors remember these things. I am a distributor, and believe it or not, I do still remember some things. When you've had the reputation as you've had, as Montclair Film Festival has had, of, I mean, there's been Best Picture winners, there've been Best Documentary winners, there's been Best International Feature winners, all playing Montclair. That's building up reputation and support that you will be able to build on in the future. And filmmakers and distributors, as I say, they do remember those things. And so that's definitely a feather in your cap, I would say.
I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that that's true. So thank you. My only other shout out is to Trent Reznor from my beloved Nine Inch Nails. He's got 2 nominations for score. I hope they win again.
How extraordinary
okay.
that someone
Amazing.
like that should
They're
turn
so
out
different.
to be, you know, and also what is it, Soul and
Mank.
And Mank. I mean, yeah, I mean, but also that they should turn out to be, you know, almost preeminent composers of film scores now.
I buy all of them. So they're excellent. We have 2 more questions for you. One from an anonymous attendee. How do you assess a streamer deal versus an independent distribution deal? Let's say a company that doesn't have its own platform. And getting your costs paid up front versus losing long-term profits and control of your intellectual property. And you're laughing because of profits. The word
well, no, I'm laughing because this
funny.
sounds like a very, I'm sure this sounds like a very inside question to me. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, in a way, the answer is in the question. I mean, if you sell to a streamer, you're selling, and that's it. That's the money that you're getting. There's no, as they describe them as overages, there's no opportunity. So take, for example, one of the films I've mentioned earlier, a film like 3 Billboards, you know, which when we originally kind of first screened it, if you like, when we did it in partnership with Fox Searchlight, but let's just say we'd done it with, you know, we'd financed it in the way that we were talking about earlier, Tom, we would have then played that in a festival and looked to sell it. And if we'd sold it to a streamer, we would maybe have got a nice check, but that film went on to do over $150 million at the worldwide box office. And that, you know, meant that the producers went from being, you know, had a decent company, but to being incredibly well established. All the filmmakers made more money than the small amount they had taken as fees for the film. Everybody, we at Film4 were able to plow the profits from that back into the rest of the slate. So it's a big decision to make. In the way it is the sort of the bird in the hand situation, but that bird in the hand is not always worth 2 in the bush.
Totally. I agree. I think it's how much faith you have in the material to be on multi-platform, because you're going to get a streaming deal after your theatrical anyway, right? You see this path for theatrical. There's no chance that your movie's not going to end up on a streamer, especially if it does well.
Sometimes you know, and you know, you can get fantastic exposure through streamer deals, and sometimes, you know, just the amount of money that is offered is just impossible to refuse.
Exactly. I was thinking of a film like Coda, which sold out of Sundance this year for $25 million. There's no way that movie's gonna, you take that money and you run.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, 2 more. We got another one in while we were chatting, which I'm going to take exception to, but I'd like to hear it. You may not know because you're in the UK. Why is HBO airing moldy, decades-old films on Saturday nights when there's certainly still new material to show? That's a question.
E.g.
Exactly.
Oh, well, I
have an answer
you
for
answer
this.
that, Tom.
So they pivoted, HBO's definitely pivoted all of their attention to HBO Max. If you go on HBO Max right now, you can watch, you know, Godzilla versus King Kong. You could watch Wonder Woman. They've got a ton of stuff. And the over-air channel, I feel, has sort of fallen by the wayside in terms of being a priority for them in terms of expenditure and exhibition. I think, personally speaking, HBO, you know, I'm a Criterion Channel diehard. I ride or die on the Criterion Channel. But HBO Max is my second favorite streaming platform. They have a deep library from Warner Brothers. So they've got old films from, you know, the Warner Brothers library that are incredible. They've got all their series, and then they've got a lot of contemporary. They're doing all the new Warner Brothers movies day and date on HBO Max for the price of your subscription. Unlike Disney Plus, for example, who's got Mulan and you have to pay $30. Raya and the Last Dragon, you got to pay $30 on top of your Disney Plus subscription. Godzilla versus Kong showed up on the platform the Friday it opened in theaters.
And that, I mean, it's going to be very interesting to see whether that model is sustainable, because, you know, initially when HBO Max and Warner Brothers decided that they were going to just day and date release all their big titles, you know, in whatever theatrical space there was and on the service, the sort of film business reacted in horror at that, because that
Right.
seemed to be the death knell for theatrical exhibition. However, Godzilla versus Kong has done as well as any movie has done. I mean, admittedly, there are not a lot of things to sort of have to beat out, but they've done incredibly well. So maybe there is a world in which, you know, people just decide, am I going to sit at home and watch it, or am I going to go to the theater and see it with a bunch of people the way it should be seen, and you know, sort of have an enjoyment, an audience enjoyment, as opposed to just a sitting on the sofa enjoyment.
Or in the case of Godzilla versus Kong, it should not be seen at all. Okay, which is not my cup of tea. I watched that with my kids. I was like, when does the plot start? We're 2 hours in. Okay, final question. Question about being a member of the Academy. How do you get asked to be a part of the Academy? And do you have an idea? I'm guessing you do have an idea how many people are in the Academy. And are you a member of the Academy?
I am a member of the Academy and a member of BAFTA. So I sort of, and I love it. I love it. I mean, you have to be nominated and you have to be seconded, and you know, they sort of go through cycles where they are looking to, as they have done over the last few years, finally bring in a much, I mean, it used to be, you know, sort of very uniform in terms of the membership, but they have made a huge effort to bring in many more female filmmakers and a much more diverse membership. And I think they've done actually a very good job of, instead of sort of thinking, oh, well, we'll do that in this year and then that year, they just did a massive recruitment drive, basically. Yeah. And I think you see, if you look at the nominations this year, I mean, the films have to be good, obviously, but you can see that that's definitely had an effect. Not sure exactly how many there are, how many members there are in the Academy, but it's
thousands.
Yes, 4,000 or 5,000 or something. But it's yeah, I mean, you don't, you know, you can't buy your way in. Basically, you have to be nominated in.
You're nominated by the type of work you do. So if you're a director, you're nominated in by directors, actors nominated in by their other fellow actors, and you can lobby friends to try and get you nominated, and they can, in their little mini campaigns that are run within the sections of the Academy, to get people a nomination so that they can join the Academy. I have several friends who sort of waged minor whisper campaigns to get themselves Academy memberships. Festival programmers, we're not top of the list, got to be honest. But
yeah, that's a tricky one.
There are a few festival programmers, and there are curators who I have a lot of respect for, who definitely deserve the position. So, Daniel Battsek, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a lot of fun for me. I hope it has been for you as well. Super grateful for you taking the time and having a glass of wine at sunset. It's probably dark now. Is it dark now? Yeah,
it's dark. The wine's finished, so good time to end.
It's fantastic. Well, thank you for doing it. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. It looks like we had a really nice crowd who stuck around and enjoyed the conversation. So thank you. We look forward to seeing you back in Montclair.
I'll be back
as soon as possible. And best of luck with The Father.
Thank you.
At the Oscars. And we can't wait to see what's next from Film4 and get it over here so that we can show it at Montclair Film.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much, Tom. And yeah, look forward to being back in town. And yeah, whatever I can do, I'm always happy to support everything that Montclair Film does. It's great.
Thank you. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Cheers.
We appreciate your time.
Okay. Good night.
Talk soon.
Or
Bye.
good afternoon. Bye.